Hey guys, it's Kevin. Here's my review for the Happytime Murders. And what the Happytime Murders is essentially about is basically we center on this world where puppets and humans coexist. And there was the show that was once called the Happytime Gang, and the brother of this former detective, Phil Phillips, and was actually in that show. He ends up getting killed, and from there, a bunch of other puppets are murdered, and basically Phillips is reunited with his former partner, who they now have some sort of rift. The two of them have to solve, what the hell's going on and all that kind of stuff, and that's really all I'm going to say. So the Happytime Murders in general, I was actually kind of interested in this film. I mean, just from the central premise, a world where humans and puppets coexist, and it's rated R, there's really no limits. I mean, there were tons of possibilities here. I kept seeing a lot of comparisons to Sausage Party. I was really hoping it would be on that level, because Sausage Party, yes, it had a lot of raunchy comedy, but it also did have a very good story to it, and I was really hoping that Happytime Murders could do that, maybe have some really good world building. And while there are things that I do like about this movie, and I don't think it's as bad as everyone else has been saying, this is not a good film. The Happytime Murders is a huge missed opportunity that I think wastes tons of potential for what they actually could have done with this world. Instead, it decides to focus on really raunchy comedy, and we're going to get into that right now, starting off with the cast. And I will say the cast is actually one of the better parts of this film. I think really everyone did a pretty solid job, particularly Bill Barretta as the main character, Phil Phillips. Of course, his puppeteering I actually thought was real good. I thought he had the character down very well. He's basically supposed to be your sort of suave detective who has become a bit hardened. There's been this, there was this incident that he was involved in, so he doesn't have the best rep, and he's trying to overcome, adversity and things like that, and I think he did a really good job in this film. Even in parts where this film isn't working, I still did enjoy his character, and he does actually work very well as the lead character of this film, and I did really like what he had to do here. I thought he was definitely really good. And then Melissa McCarthy. Now, I will say this right now, she is a very hit-or-miss actress for me. There are some things I really love her in. St. Vincent, Spy, haven't seen her in Bridesmaids, so I can't say. But then there are things I really don't like her that much in, like Life of the Party earlier this year. And here, once again, she's very hit-or-miss for me. There are some points where I really do like her. I really did like her dynamic with Phillips, but then there were points where I thought she was going way too over the top. So, I'm not going to say she was necessarily miscasted, because I'm sure, I do think that the dynamic was good between the two. It was just at points I thought she did actually get a little too over the top for me, and I just thought she really was back and forth. But like I said, when it is these two together, I actually do think they worked very well, and I did like their chemistry overall. It just sucks that the rest of the movie, besides them, is honestly really mediocre. Because the rest of the cast here, they do what they need to do, but just nothing amazing. Maya Rudolph is kind of wasted in this film. She does have some good lines here and there, but she didn't really have much of anything to do. Joel McHale, Elizabeth Banks is especially wasted, and she's a very interesting character because she's the only human on the that was formerly on the Happytime Gang shows, and they really could have done a lot with her. And what she has, she does her best for sure. She's kind of channeling her inner, like, Margot Robbie in Wolf of Wall Street. Like, that's what her character was remind me of. She had, like, the same voice and everything, but just in general, there just wasn't a lot for her to do. Leslie David Baker as well, he does what he needs to do, but just the cast in general, like I said, they're definitely not the problem here. They're trying their best, and I do think they did a good job overall. Which, with that being said, let's get into the directing, because here's the thing. I would not be as disappointed as I was with this film if the director wasn't someone who was inexperienced with puppeteering. Like, if this was someone like, say, Paul Feig or Dennis Dugan or someone like that, or like Judd Apatow, or a raunchy director of some sort, or even like Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, obviously, I wouldn't expect a lot from them simply because they are not as experienced with puppeteering. Brian Henson, on the other hand, I mean, his name is literally Henson. This is the guy who gave us Muppet Treasure Island and the Muppets Christmas Carol. So the fact that this film really lacks a lot of heart and a lot of the spirit that we've come to know from other Henson ventures really disappointed me, because the thing is with this film is that most of this film just focuses on very raunchy, disgusting humor. And it seemed like that's all that Brian Henson really cared about. And that honestly really did disappoint me, because I really was hoping that, you know, he could do that. There's nothing wrong with raunchy humor, but there just isn't really that good of a story to fall back on that. Whenever he goes to the dramatic stuff, it is well executed. I'm not going to say it's not, because there actually was some solid dramatic stuff here and there, but I just thought overall his directing just seemed very unfocused. It seemed like he wanted this to be as over the top as it could possibly be, but he forgot the warm spirit and the charm that the other Muppets films had, and that's just simply not here. And again, I'm not trying to compare it to the Muppets. I'm just saying the fact that it's directed by someone who did those two films, and this just feels very lost and almost like he didn't really know what he was doing, just really disappointed me overall. I don't really know how this film turned out the way it did. I expected a lot more from him, and I just simply did not get it here. It's honestly pretty tone deaf in my eyes, but the writing is really the biggest problem here, because I'm going to be honest with you, for the first, I'd say, 20 to 30 minutes of this movie, I actually wasn't disliking it all that much. The introduction for Philip's character, I think, is actually pretty solid. We get into the fact that he's this hardened cop. You know, he had this one incident happen, and he's trying to sort of overcome it. He's also trying to get puppets to be taken a bit more seriously, because society is kind of abusing them, and there's sort of like a racism thing going on there. His brother also was part of the Happytime gang, and he has fond memories of it, while Phillips, on the other hand, he thinks those days have passed, and he doesn't really hold it to that. He doesn't really hold it that close to his as close to his heart that his brother does. So, like I said, there was some really interesting stuff there. But the second that his brother gets killed off, which it happens very early on, it's not a spoiler, because like I said, they're going after the Happytime gang. You know that a bunch of them are going to die. The second that does happen, the film really starts to lose focus. It starts to focus much more on just really mean-spirited, raunchy comedy, and some of it does land. I'm not going to lie, there were some things I did like here and there, like the banter between McCarthy and Bill Barretta, I thought was actually pretty good, but just in general, it just seemed like that was the film's only concern. All they cared about was being over the top and shocking you and trying to be as crude as possible, again, simply because, oh, puppets are saying it, so it's funny, and that's not really the case. You know, a joke, sometimes, like I said, it can be funny, but a lot of them just go on way too long, and after a while, they start to lose a lot of steam, and I was just very disappointed with that. And I wouldn't have a huge problem with the comedy if there was a solid story to fall back on, but there simply isn't. The mystery, honestly, isn't really all that interesting to me. At first, I was getting a bit invested in it, you know, with it being the Happytime gang, and it's connected somehow, what's really going on there. But as the film goes on, I started to realize they're not really doing anything with it. They don't really give you any solid clues. They don't really give you any possible suspects. You know, we don't really see Phillips do any detective work. We hear in passing that he was a really good detective, but there's nothing like that in this movie. And once we do get to the eventual reveal, it ends up being really predictable. Like, I knew for sure the second this character was introduced, that's probably what's happening. That's probably the person that did it, and that's exactly how it played out. So, like I said, it's just not a very engaging film in terms of the mystery, and I just wasn't really all that into it. And the rift between McCarthy and Barretta as well, I just thought wasn't especially strong either. The reasoning for them having this hatred for each other just doesn't really make a lot of sense in retrospect. When you think about it, honestly, like, at first, okay, maybe, but as it goes on, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense why they had this seething sort of hatred for each other, and I just did not really understand it overall. And like I said, I do think this film dodged a lot of missed opportunities. In terms of the world building, this film is extremely weak. We only really focus on the most gross shit possible. Like, they visit a strip club at one point. They visit a bunch of, like, drug lords. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but we don't really venture outside of that. The Happytime gang especially just feels like an afterthought. It doesn't really feel like that's a major part of this film, and characters like Elizabeth Banks, someone who was the only human cast member in that show, we could have gotten into some really interesting stuff with, but we really only see how, you know, Phillips feels about her. We never get into who she really was, how she really felt in that show. We never get into any of that, and there's a lot of characters that are very much wasted in that way, and I really did want to get more into it. Like I said, the whole angle with the whole puppets not being treated right by society, that's glossed over very quickly. We hear a couple things about it here and there, but again, it just never really feels like it's at the forefront. The only concern is that, like I said, very over-the-top humor that does get very old after a while, because it seems like that's the only thing the film really does care about, unfortunately. In terms of the puppeteering, I will say it's not the worst. Some of it is actually really off. A lot of the mouth movements do not really go in conjunction with what they're saying. With Phillips, it's fine, but a lot of them just didn't really work overall, and it didn't really feel that natural. And again, coming from someone like Brian Henson and Kevin Clash, you know, people who are professional puppeteers and have done this for years, I was just very surprised at how off some of the movements were for the puppets, because it really just felt a little bit, it just felt a little bit half-assed, like a lot of this movie did. The score's fine, I guess. You know, like I said, Barretta and McCarthy do have solid chemistry overall. I did like some of their banter, but in terms of the editing, the film, I think, is very much rushed. You know, we get into the murder very quickly, and from there, it's just very just ribald jokes and a lot of offensive humor that can be funny, but that's like the only thing the film really does focus on. It doesn't really focus on the murder until it really needs to. It doesn't focus on the rift between Phillips and Edwards until it really needs to. It doesn't focus on really anything until it really needs to, except for that comedy. So again, it's just a very frustrating experience. There are things I do like about this movie. I really like Phillips as a character. I like getting into who he really was before all this. I like the chemistry between Edwards and Phillips. It's just, in general, the film does not really focus on it a lot. It seems very unfocused. It didn't really feel like it knew what it wanted to be, and I think the film would work a lot better if it took itself a little bit more seriously and maybe started to dive a little bit more into the whole, you know, puppet discrimination and things like that, because that really could have worked, but it always just feels like an afterthought. It never really feels like the film dives headfirst into this, and to that I answer, why did you even bring these things up if you weren't going to follow through with it? I just did not really understand it. Ultimately, the Happytime Murders is not as bad as everyone has been saying. It's just a really big disappointment. The world building is very weak. There's a lot of characters that I think were very much wasted. We really don't get into the central mystery of everything. Much of the humor falls extremely flat. A lot of it is very, very repetitive and just gets very old very fast, like the silly string gag and things like that. There was some humor that I did think was kind of clever, but just overall, this film really didn't do much of anything for me. It was a huge missed opportunity. It really did not seem to have much of a focus. You guys might find it funny because my audience clearly did, but just for me in general, I honestly was just very annoyed, and I really wanted a lot more from it. It's easily one of the biggest missed opportunities, I think, of the entire year. There were a lot of things you could have done with this, and you simply just didn't. And for that reason alone, I am going to give the Happytime Murders a C-. Like I said, I don't think it's as bad as everyone has been saying it is, but it still was a pretty big missed opportunity. It does very much feel like a mid-August release, and it's really nothing you need to go rush out and see. But overall, guys, let me know what you guys thought of the Happytime Murders overall. Left your thoughts in it. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.